So if anyone misses anything, they'll be able to access it later. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you Katie for speaking with us today. So this is one of the sessions in the ESW talk series, and today we're joined by Katie Patrick, all the way from Costa Rica, with a background of a green building in like Milan, Italy. So this is a very international discussion that you all have tuned in for. So Katie, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and your work and just take it from there.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Sanjana. Yeah, I am calling from a cafe in Costa Rica, so I'm sorry if there's some background noise or like a toucan like comes in. I mean, that would be really cool if that happens. But I'll just jump in and do my screen share now. Okay, it's always a little bit awkward when we do this switch. Okay, how's that looking now? Are you still on, Sanjana? Can you answer me?
Yeah, no, it looks great.
Yeah, with that little face thing, can you see, is it just like my face in the corner? Because I kind of see everybody's like that.
Yeah, no, we have like a strip of people on the side. It's just, I guess everyone else turned their cameras off so we can watch. So we're all here, just silently.
Oh, can I just get it like just me so it doesn't kind of interfere with the designs? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah. Does this help? Does this
I just
change
go
the
one,
view for you at all?
Then there's one. What are that?
So you might be able to change your view.
Well, I've got you now.
Right corner. Yeah, so you can have it as like standard or gallery or something to move the faces around. So whatever's best for you. But we can see your screen.
Okay.
Your full screen.
All right. I just wanted to, sorry everyone about this. I just wanted to figure this out once and for all. Okay. Oh, well, there's both of us. I see both of us are there. Anyway, I'm just going to leave it like that. And hopefully, oh, well. It's just going to be like that. Anyway. Okay, everybody. So sorry about the awkward start. We're going to dive in now. So my background is I'm an environmental engineer, and now I specialize in the design of bringing in gamification principles and behavioral psychology into environmental change. And sorry about that truck. And I specialize in working in environmental, in how we apply behavioral psychology and game design to environmental data. Oh my God. Okay, so we're all here on this call today because we all want to change the world. And you might have just gone about it a whole lot of different ways. Like you might have read books or you might have watched or hosted a documentary night, been to a conference, you might have written a blog post, been involved in academic research studies. Maybe you think an art project is a great idea, or you think if we just get more media coverage about these issues, things will be better. Maybe you've hosted an event, or you built some sort of social network. When we're looking at all of these different types of projects we do to try to change the world, we have to ask this question, like, are we actually doing anything? And by that I mean, are we doing anything that is measurable? And this takes us into this issue that comes up in the environmental change movement, which is that a lot of historical projects and things that we can do, we think that we have to educate people. If people just know about climate change, if they only know that they should put on solar, get an electric car, or grow their own vegetables, things will change. And now education is good at eliciting concern. There have been many, this has been studied over and over by behavioral psychologists that show if you show people a documentary on the polar bears going extinct, people will genuinely care about the polar bears. So then there's this idea, we can call it a hypothesis, that if people only cared more about species and the planet, then they would save it. But the thing is that this is what really happens. Is that educating people on an issue and getting them emotionally concerned about an issue just doesn't lead to action. They're not drivers that get people to do stuff. And this is called the value action gap. It's a bit like, you know, we have the value that we want to eat more vegetables and go to the gym, but it doesn't mean that we actually do it. It can also be called the information deficit hypothesis. And so when we're trying to get people to do stuff, to make environmental changes, we have to see that we have to tap into the mind like it has a whole bunch of doors going into it. We can't just make these assumptions that just educating people and getting people to care are going to create action, because there are a lot of people out there that are vastly educated about environmental issues, really care, they still don't do the actual behaviors that we need to have happen. So when we start to look into this field of the psychology of influence, it starts to tell us a picture of how we get to make change. And so I've been obsessed with this area for about 5 years now, since I discovered environmental psychology, and I started to think about, I started to read game design textbooks and started to think, well, how do I apply this to the environmental stuff that I work on? It was enormously fascinating, and I felt enormously driven to help share this knowledge with my industry of sustainability professionals. So it's in this book, How to Save the World. It's available on my website at katiepatrick.com and also on Amazon if you're interested in taking a much deeper dive into this subject matter. And I'll be going through like a few of the concepts here in our talk today. So the first step of how to really design change is really looking into your data and understanding this real world metric, not getting worried about like clicks and subscribers, but really being quite ruthless about what it is you want to change. And I was really pleased to see that Bill Gates put this in his 2013 annual letter to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which says you can achieve amazing progress if you set a clear goal and you find a measure that will drive progress towards that goal. This may seem pretty basic, but it's amazing to me how often is not done and how hard it is to get right. And it might seem obvious to say, yes, you need to measure exactly what you want to change, but I do this, I've been doing this as my full-time work for years now, and it's amazing if you look at government departments and not-for-profits and social enterprise startups, how exactly what Bill Gates says, how it's overlooked and how hard it is to really get right. And this takes us, when we look at this idea of looking into data, we can ask the question, well, what happens if we get the data out to people? Like, do people change when they see the numbers? And it's going to be called the disclosure of data. Disclosing data, otherwise known as targeted transparency or smart disclosure, can create dramatic change in itself. Like in many cases, you don't need to do that much extra than just show people the numbers, and just that in itself will make a change. And the first time this was really noticed in the environmental movement was this thing called the EPA's Toxic Release Inventory. And this got started in the late 1990s. After the Bhopal incident in India, where there was a really disastrous chemical gas leak that killed thousands of people. And the EPA wanted to get a sense of how much toxic chemicals were being used in American corporations. So they asked them to disclose to them just how much toxic chemicals they were using. Now, this was not disclosed to the public. It wasn't anything to do with marketing. It was simply an accounting measure from the EPA. But then something kind of magical happened. After 5 years of doing this, toxic chemical use went down in the United States by 45%. Now, 45% is an enormous figure. If you imagine reducing landfill by 45%, or traffic accidents by 45%, or global CO2 emissions, it's a really big number. So it got the attention of all of these different academics and behavioral economics scientists to really understand what was going on. So, sorry, where was I? I mean, helping it to admit people in to the lecture now. I lost my train of thought. Okay, so the EPA, they're just disclosing the data by itself leads to change. And so what we then do is look at the disclosure of data as the primary mechanism of change, that basically like the skeleton in your body, and then we layer on different behavioral drivers and gamification things over the top of that core mechanism of showing data. And then you can create a really wonderful, almost like a symphony or an orchestra of design tools of how to actually get over that value action gap to create change. So another quick example. Now, this is like the opposite of something big and complex. This is just a small study done at a university where they just showed a sign that showed how much paper was being recycled. When they showed the sign, the number that was being recycled, paper recycling went up by 77%. Really big changes for this very small intervention of just showing people the numbers. And so when we start looking more high tech at this, like how we can actually use real-time data, it starts to get really fun. And here's just a few examples of how some really cool stuff that's starting to happen. So this is called the glow light. The light changes color based on how much electricity you're using. And it has like a little sensor that just sticks on the side, almost like a Band-Aid that just sticks on the side of your main electricity cable. This is one from Planet Labs. They have these small satellites that photograph the whole Earth almost every day. You may have seen these bicycle counters. that count how many bicycles go past every day. LiDAR gives you like a 3D, or any kind of aerial imaging can be done with aircraft, gives you a 3D model of the Earth. This is one called an atmotube. It senses, it's like a necklace that senses air pollution, so you can like walk around and it can be sensing, you know, where the air pollution is over the city if lots of people are wearing these necklaces. Another one here is trash. You know, getting the actual arm of the garbage truck to tell how much garbage is actually in that one load, so you can communicate it back to the household or to business. That currently does not exist. And a favorite of ours from our recent hackathon, thermal imaging of land surface temperature. And really, like, the world is your oyster and what you can do with putting sensors out to get this type of data. And there are sensors everywhere. Like, this doesn't need to be that hard. You can buy them for a couple of dollars off SparkFun or off eBay. You get a soldering iron, you could use a YouTube tutorial, and with like just a little bit of computer science skills, you know, you can actually start to build this stuff. And I don't think we need to be afraid of this area of diving into it. Now I'm just going to go through a few of my own different concept designs when I start thinking about how do I apply this concept to these big data sets, you know, sort of what would I think of. And then later on, I'll go into more of the theory behind what these designs are about. So this one's about fuel. What about a digital billboard? Fuel is the biggest, this is for cars and transportation, is the biggest CO2 emitter right now. And so this push towards electric vehicles is a really big deal. Why don't we show how much fuel, you know, how many gallons or how much CO2 per gallon is being released in any city at any time? What about a screen that shows the amount of megawatts of electricity that are being used in a major city, so people start to really see, you know, this is how much power our city is using. This is an app I designed called the V-Score, which is, instead of just telling people that they need to go vegan, this kind of like binary life option, which can be quite threatening and quite difficult, why don't we show in menus the percentage of plant to animal calories? So if you have a high amount of vegetables in your diet, you get a high V-score. If you have a low amount, you get a low V-score. And this way we're nudging. This is the term used in behavioral psychology. We're nudging people through iterative improvements. Same thing can be done with air quality. You can have an air quality sensor in a city and then show it in real time for that exact location. Air quality changes meter by meter. 5 meters away, it can be totally different. And so we can have these signs everywhere to help, you know, show people where the bad air quality really is. This is one I did up that was been quite popular on social media. This is a billboard that shows you the real-time carbon dioxide emissions from the grid, because the grid changes its electricity intensity dramatically from the daytime to the nighttime. So what if we showed it to people? And we really can't get to a zero CO2 electricity grid unless we deal with these peak times that happen in the evening and in summer, where the CO2 really goes through the roof. And most people don't know about that. What about on buildings? I did these designs up for every single building, theoretically, in a city would have a screen like this, just like an iPad type of design, that shows it based on color how much CO2 it was producing relative to all of the other buildings in the city. And so it would look something like this, right? And this kind of like ambient messaging just kind of nudges people towards, you know, improving the entire system. And it can be creative. This is if it were an orb, like an art installation. I mean, why can't art installations also show data and show it in color and make it fun? You know, art doesn't need to be static. You know, it can sort of be like data visualization art. And this is how we applied this to this thing I've been working on called Energy Lollipop, where currently the California ISO, which is what tracks all of the megawatt hours and the CO2 for the California electricity grid, it has this data, but it's like really hard to interpret, and it's just like a black line on a chart. So I looked at it and it was kind of struggling to really interpret it. So I applied this color scale all the way from dark crimson all the way to blue, using like this whole sort of area of the rainbow to help communicate the intensity of the grid at any one time, because color, you know, we just intuitively know what color is. And so you can see this is basically how the CO2 emissions curve during the day. They go up in the morning, this is sort of the evening, and then they go right down during the middle of the day when all of the solar panels are on, and then they take this huge spike in the evening, and that pretty much happens every day of the year. And this is looking at green cover, right? There's a band of the electromagnetic spectrum called near infrared, and you can extract this out. Google actually released something very similar to this idea recently, which is worth looking up. And then we can add this basic gamification principles, you know, like a pie chart, 27% green coverage, and then we can rank all the cities in terms of their green coverage based on their geo boundary. And this is like not advanced computer science to do at all. This is one I've been working on, thermal imaging. This is an example of a high resolution thermal image taken by an aircraft. And once we can get this imagery, what we can do is use GIS tools to figure out what the average temperature is per land parcel and then compare them. This is where we're really getting into the guts of behavioral psychology, of comparing one person to another. You know, and can CO2 emissions be in outdoor screens like this? Outdoor lights that show you the CO2 of a city changing in real time or changing every 5 minutes. And in terms of this design, all I wanted to highlight, this is something I did for waste for the University of Santa Cruz, just this idea of like a progress bar, right? Of like, where is the progress bar? The beginning, the end, and tracking the progress. That's all this stuff does, right? And getting it a little bit more fun, this is we can use augmented reality, like Magic Leap, the glasses that you put on, and then you can see an overlay of the world. So we could do some really fun things. Like, for example, you could look out on a cityscape and you could see the energy intensity or the carbon intensity of all of the different buildings. And this could be a really fun way to kind of nudge all these poor performing buildings to do better. And you can also do it for air pollution. Could we distribute a whole bunch of low-cost sensors, like maybe a few hundred of them down one particular like city corridor, and then you could walk down and really have a very salient experience of what air pollution was for a particular campaign. And so all this stuff is about getting a feedback loop of data. So we get the data, we get it in a feedback loop, we give people rewards. And I call this area of design FITBIT for the planet design, looking at feedback loops and how to design them in a way that's fun. And so then we move into this idea of the goal. We go from here to there, right? We're here and we go to there. This might sound really obvious. Okay, yeah, we have this much CO2 and we want to go to there. We have this much waste and we want to go to there. But you would be amazed how few people actually really think like this and actually really look at this, right? And so from really looking deeply into your data and how to get from here to there, you want to start finding ideas from looking into the data. And so I use this phrase, ideas are harvested from looking deep into your data. And when you hang around people who want to change the world and they're coming up with ideas, you don't necessarily find that this is what people do. They don't look deep into a spreadsheet to come up with ideas. People are looking around at sort of what other people are doing to come up with ideas. And that's kind of the wrong way to do it. And when you really start going into the numbers and asking a lot of questions, this is where your real creativity will come from. And it's in this place when you bring measurement to the center of the creative process. All my best ideas, and I'm kind of known for having a lot of ideas. I have a lot of ideas. I put them out. It's all from looking into the numbers and asking this question, like, how can I change this? How can I change that metric? And that's when I started doing that, is when I started to have really good ideas. And honestly, like, all this is that I do is I start with the starting place of a progress bar. I decide where I want to go, and then tracking the progress, how to track the progress and how to give people rewards along the way. This is the basic design framework for making change. Again, it might sound obvious, but this is what we do. If you don't have a progress bar tracking progress, you don't have change, right? And now this is a kind of a fun thing to do, right? You might want to see my TED talk. I go into this in a much deeper. It's on YouTube if you look it up. So this is about having a visualization for where you want to go, like a vision for the future world, right? So there's this line from the author, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, where he says, if you want to build a ship, do not drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And this is something that we just don't do in the environmental movement. right? Like I got this stuff from the self-help movement, right? And from the creative industry. Like I did not find anything about imagination and creativity from within the craft of being an environmental engineer or a sustainability professional, right? So when we look at this, like what is the vision that we want everybody to come with us on? Like what is your version of the vast and endless sea? We're just not asking this question enough. And this is what we need to be doing to unleash our imagination for the world that we're trying to create. And here's just a few pictures of, you know, what this imagination could include. This is an amazing architect. You might have seen this before. It's a building called the Dragonfly that's modeled on a leaf, like with a vertical garden and stuff. This is an architect. His name is Vincent Calabor. Look him up. He does these incredible futuristic eco-cities. It doesn't need to be super futuristic either. It could just be like kids growing their own vegetables at school, right? With Michelle Obama. And, you know, can we create visualizations? This is one I did of just a sort of a dirty looking city street. And then I photoshopped all this green layers over it. And we have to understand how critical it is to get people to, because people imitate things. This is the core of human psychology, right? And people will also unconsciously imitate the undesirable behavior that you present. So this is because it kind of encourages people to do that, because we're naturally animals of imitation. So sorry about the background noise. So if you look at like Mercedes-Benz, right? There's like, advertisers don't put out ads like this, right? They don't put ads of what not to be, right? They put out ads of what to be, right? So all the advertising people, they all got together and then they decided that what men ultimately want is a supermodels cleaning a sports car, 3 of them in an evening gown. So they've tapped into the male psyche. They know that's exactly what he wants. But we need to do this. We need to visualize what the world is that we're trying to create. And this is why we want to not use these negative imagery. This is just one example of like the petrified forest, where there's all these rocks, right? Rocks of petrified wood. And they had this sign up that said, "Your heritage is being vandalized every day by thieves." Basically saying everybody's stealing the rocks, right? They changed the sign to say, "Please do not remove the rocks from the park." And then the sign, the vandalism or the rock theft went down by 50%, right? And there's many more examples like that, right? So what I ask people to do is to start off with your dream, get a big piece of paper, put a circle around it, write the number that you want to achieve there, and then just start brainstorming how to get there. This is the inherent creative process. Brainstorm about how to actually get to that goal, and that's when you'll come up with really, really good ideas. Okay, but so then we go into action. We understand the numbers. How do we get from where we are to where we want to go, our utopian visualization, and how do we understand the behavioral psychology to make action happen? So the first thing you need to do is isolate the behavior. You figure out who your actor is, like the individual, the one person that you need. Like, who are they? What action do you want them to do? And then what is the result that you want? Okay, so one way to do that, it's totally underappreciated, is this thing called pledges. Basically writing a promise, like I pledge to make my own plastic-free lunch, right? And so you can just get people to write it and then photograph it and put it on Instagram. And then this other one that was done called the engine idling pledge. Sorry, I've just got these people talking. It's just, I just can't concentrate. Can I just take a break for a second?
Yes, of course. Oh, you're on mute.
I can hardly even hear myself. How bad is it for everybody else?
We can still hear you.
We can hear you.
There's definitely some noise, but we can hear you.
Okay, I'm just going to try and move a bit. Just hold on, everybody.
Yeah, all good. So in the meantime, I'm seeing some questions and stuff pop up in the chat. So definitely keep dropping them in there, because at the end of the talk, we'll have some time for everyone to read their questions for a discussion. So keep it up. Thanks, guys.
Okay, how's that?
That's great.
Okay, there's some birds now.
Amazing.
Hopefully they're not worse. Okay.
Indian.
All right. Okay. So now we're getting into the engine idling pledge. This was done in Canada. This is when parents pull up to drop their kids off at school, right? And now what happens is that most of the parents keep their cars running, right? So it creates this big cloud of air pollution while people are dropping their kids off from school. And so they put all these signs up that said, okay, it's raining on me now. I have to go back inside. So they put up a whole bunch of signs and it didn't work. So what they did is, so they hired this behavioral psychology specialist, and then they asked everybody to commit a pledge. So they got volunteers to go up car by car and then write down, you know, I promise to turn my engine off when I drop my kids off at school. And then, you know, bingo, the car engine idling goes down by 73%. It's an enormously powerful tool. Asking people to just write down a promise, you know, will get people to change. And I did this in a little zero waste group that I set up in San Francisco, and it was amazing. Like, one of the guys started sending me pictures of his coffee cup. The other guy, who's the one smiling, I met him at a conference a year later, and he said, I'm still making my own toothpaste. You know, people like feel really compelled to do this once they've made a promise. Okay, another thing we can do is just altering the environment. Like, people think often you need to have these like epic, big, systemic sort of educational change things. But if you just, you know, like install a water refill station, that could be like a really simple way to start getting people off using disposable plastic, or just put a sign on the door to help people remember whatever they need to remember. This third picture here is a shopping bag rack that I installed at my place, because people kept on accumulating these paper bags. So I put in this rack, and then once I put it up, then people stopped using the plastic bags and I started bringing these paper bags to the store again. Now this one called foot in the door technique is really interesting. This is especially important for people that think that we need massive dramatic change now and we can't afford to do tiny things. And every time you inspire someone to do a small environmental action, it's actually kind of hurting the bigger picture. Well, that's really not true. So this study showed that there was they got two test groups of different you know, sort of clusters of households in a neighborhood. And the first one they went up to with a really big sign asking people to drive carefully. And pretty much nobody agreed to the big sign, like 99% of people said no. Then they went to a second group of households, and they put in a small sign. And most of them, I think it was like 70 or 80% or something, agreed to the small sign. Now, they went back to the small sign people 3 months later, and they found that the small sign people, actually 76% of them agreed to the really big sign. So it's a really important understanding to understand that every small change enables a bigger change, and that we shouldn't ever like poo-poo or look down upon asking people to do small changes, because they're kind of like a stepping stone of getting people used to doing these big changes. And another big one is social norms. And what I mean by social norms, if you haven't heard of the phrase before, is that we copy each other. Everybody is always copying everybody else. We can't help it. It's how we are, human beings are designed. And this one study that's quite well known in this field was about getting people in hotel rooms to reuse their towels. And they made a little hanger, and the phrase on the hanger said, 75% of the guests who stayed in this room participated in our new resource savings program by using their towels more than once. And this is different to a phrase that just says, please reuse your towels for the environment. Basically, whenever you ask somebody to do something for the environment, it either doesn't work that well or it doesn't work at all. But they phrased this to say, like, everybody else was doing it, and then they made it a little bit extra salient by saying, in this room. And then when they added that, it got a 29% increase in the result, just by changing the wording. So when you think about this across big environmental campaigns that have millions of dollars spent on them, 29% uptick in, you know, something like towel reuse or whatever it's applied to, these can have really big environmental impacts when they're over like really big systems. Okay, this is a fun one showing how we all copy each other. This study was done on male college students in the shower. So what they tried to do is to get these male students to soap up their bodies while keeping the water of the tap off, so they would waste less water. So same as the engine idling one, they put up a sign that said, please help save water and turn off the shower while soaping up. The sign didn't do anything and nobody did it, right? So they hired an actor and they got him to do it, right? And as soon as they hired one actor, okay, the behavior went up by 49%. So I thought, what a great result. Let's hire a second actor. And then it went up by 67%. So we need to model the behaviors. And even if you're just one person standing in line at the coffee shop with your reusable mug, you are modeling that behavior for everybody else around you. And this is how change spreads, right? And this is one I did for, oh wait, what am I doing here? Okay, sorry. This is a software I started to design for a solar project, and you can really see it in the solar panels. It's quite funny, right? The solar panel, you'll see that one solar panel, wherever you see a solar panel, when you look on Google Satellite View in San Francisco, you'll see that all the neighbors around it also have solar panels, showing that as one person did it, then the next neighbor and the next neighbor and the next neighbor did it. And you can see them here, right? So I thought, you know, how can we really encourage this neighbor to neighbor kind of action? So I put this design together. I did this up in Mapbox, where you can adjust the colors. I put a progress bar up the top, you know, where we want to get to. We want to have 100% of houses have solar. And at the moment I could count them. So this is real data. I didn't just make this up. I actually looked at the satellite view. I could see which ones had solar panels. And then 6.7% of houses have solar panels in this particular block. And you can see in this one, I've basically got an empty spot. So it's kind of like an empty space that's like craving to be filled by a badge. It has 0%. It has a little progress by here. These ones have solar. They get a, you know, happy solar badge and a tick at 6.1%, and along here, and you can see there's a plus to here. So we would, in theory, if this, you know, was to completely come to fruition, you could go around to all of the houses and then ask people to sort of ask their neighbors to copy them to get solar until, you know, the whole thing filled up. And I've expanded on this for a recent project to really look at there are three main things that release carbon dioxide in a home, and that's your car. So moving to an electric vehicle. Sorry, I've got the wrong label on these. I only just did this a couple of days ago. Getting off gas, that's gas heating, gas stove, gas hot water, and also getting solar. So there are three big badges that households can take. And the reality is of solving climate change is that we need to get every single household to do these things. There's no way to do it than one house at a time. And so I gave each one of the houses, this is again in Mapbox, 3 little badges. So hopefully to create a community cluster, like a small group of 20 to 40 households, and then to try and encourage everybody to work together in a community to each get their house across the line of these 3 behaviors. And then we can track the households through the electricity utility apps, if they have them, to actually track that data, disclose that data over time, and then really use badges to get, you know, see how many households we're working with, and then get, you know, ideally we want every single household to have the badges and really leverage that community of everybody copying everybody else. And then we can see all of these little clusters of communities, the community block, and how well they're doing in terms of their progress towards zero CO2. And this brings us to this concept of agency, which you may have heard in games or just in normal language. Now, agency is kind of like motivation, but it's a little bit different. It's kind of like I'm motivated to affect the results. Like I believe that I can affect it. Like when I know that I use my reusable coffee cup, that it's really making a difference. And that happens through real-time feedback loops really help with that agency. meaning, motivation or empowerment. So the best example of immediate agency is the Toyota Prius dashboard. Like, you're literally in the driver's seat. As soon as you accelerate or brake, all these numbers change. And that's the really way to think about agency is, can I affect these numbers with my own behavior right now? That's the kind of model we want to think about in terms of what we can adopt. We do it, and we do it all over the place, right? But we haven't really done it in environmental data very well yet. So, I mean, you've seen these speeding zones before, right? You put in one of these signs, it's really simple. Speeding goes down by 14%. And then we can add comparison, right? Leaderboards and comparing one person against another, right? You may have seen O-Power. That's this little chart that goes in your electricity bill. It compares you against your neighbors, right? So they put in these little charts and they get a 3% drop in electricity usage. Now, that might sound like it's not a really big number, but when you look at the CO2 emissions in the whole grid, I mean, 3% is kind of like what aircraft contribute to the whole pie, right, of CO2. So 3% is actually a pretty big number, considering what a small intervention this is. Okay, now look at how, and then we can go a little bit deeper in this concept of how we could use leaderboards. This is a design up I did for an apartment building. Could you have all of the different apartments ranked in a leaderboard as to their energy consumption per square foot? And then we can look at how do then we apply color. Red is bad, green is good, all the other colors in between. This is something Greenpeace does they put this out every year for all of the different electronics companies, and they just end up wherever they end up on this color dial. And this is really great for PR and social media and getting attention to this cause. Or color can be electronic. There's a whole bunch of colored LEDs you can use, and think of, how can you apply data to make a real-time feedback loop to a colored LED can help really then drive the action. And this is how we've done it in my recent startup, Energy Lollipop. This is a Chrome extension that shows you your CO2 emissions, and the whole background is the color. So if you open it up and it's like dark crimson, you're like, oh my God, what happened? Why did I use up so much energy yesterday? And it gives you all these colors right up to this bluey aqua color. And then, okay, another layer you can add to this, star ratings. Now, we do this with car safety ratings. They're a great example of the government mandated disclosure of data. The cars don't get a say in their safety ratings. They have to do it, and it's third-party accredited. They get ranked in a leaderboard, they get a star, and they get a color. So they're using all of the different design mechanisms in one. And you can see how this is more meaningful than if this was all cut out, if it had no color and no star and no rank, and they were just all sitting there with like a number, it would be much harder to work out. And this is the way the vehicle fuel efficiency labels are done in Europe. The American ones are way behind. They're pretty ugly. But this is a great way to do it, where you've got the color, you're using color, and you've got the number here in terms of the fuel efficiency per kilometer, and you've got this ABC here, right? And then to try and get people to do the behavior, this thing called the behavior chart. This is basically like a sticker chart where you got as a child, and then you got a sticker whenever you did something good. But a lot of these things, we have to train ourselves out of doing certain things. You might need to train yourself out of eating meat or using plastic or, whatever it is, right? So giving people a chart where they get a sticker can be fun, and it doesn't need to be low tech and childlike. You can be high tech. This is something I did for the solar software. Every time the company managed to get a solar installation done, they get their basically own software version of the sticker chart, right? Let's do this a whole lot more. And then when somebody does something that's really good, we want to give badges and rewards, like you saw in the other example I did earlier. And this is all about when we get somebody to do the behavior, we feed the reward center of the brain. Now, when you study environmental science, environmental engineering, nobody's going to teach you about the reward center of the brain. But it's kind of like 101 for if you study like neuroscience or psychology. And this means that the brain always wants a cookie. The brain doesn't necessarily want to be scared of a future of climate doom and environmental destruction. It wants a cookie, right? And the way that we do that is giving people a smiley face or something that says good job. Like, it can be really simple, just being like, hey, you did an awesome job, congratulations for doing that cool thing. And we want to think about how we design that into the whole thing. And a little bit can just go a really long way with this stuff. A friend of mine did a study on Wikipedia, people who voluntarily edit Wikipedia. And she found by putting a tiny flower, like it was like a small little digital flower, when people had, you know, completed like 15 hours or something of Wikipedia editing, got a 20% increase. You know, like it's quite a reasonable increase in someone's behavior through just this very tiny mechanism of just rewarding people when they do, you know, what you want them to do. And this is the final one. We're at the end now. So this is using emotive animals. Emotions, faces are really powerful ways of trying to get people to do stuff. We're really reactive to this kind of thing. So in this particular example, in this study, they got two different groups of students. They gave one group of students an owl that had a flat expression, and the other had an owl that had a happy expression. And the ones with the happy expression, the students did 23% better. And when you read the study, it says it's not direct that the happy owl just kind of like makes people get better grades, but it's that the happy owl makes people feel good, which makes people feel relaxed, which means that when the brain feels happy and relaxed, it has more space available for concentration and increased levels of concentration. Stress and negativity and doom are really bad for our ability to concentrate and to think creatively. So the more that we can create happy emotions, which says a lot for the whole like climate narrative, right? You know, if we can create these positive emotions, we can get people's attention longer to concentrate more, you know, and hopefully feed that into whatever we want, you know, the change that we want to have happen. And so all of this comes down to, all of this design work and all of these theories come back down to this concept of causality. What is the causal mechanism that is going to create change? It's something that we get scrambled all the time, you know? Like, is it corporations? Is it the patriarchy? You know, like, is it that people are lazy? Like, people are always rushing to come up with the causal link for what creates change happen. And when you go through this data-driven mechanism, and really looking through the behavior and the different drivers, you can get a really shrewd sense of really what is it that gets somebody over the hump of whatever it is you want them to do. So causality, causality, causality. And just to wrap up, I think there's more to our mission to try and make the world a better place than just, you know, the sort of practical stuff of trying to like save trees or save kilowatt hours. You know, I really think that changing the world is a creative act, and our purpose here in life on the earth is to take our inner creative essence and to share it with the world. And I love this this example of the prism of light, that when you put white light through the prism, it refracts out into a rainbow. And so our purpose is to kind of find this prism of whatever it is for us, like our work or our project, and you know, invest our creative energy into this prism and then kind of shine it out through the world. And that's the end. So let's stay in touch. You've got my email there, kp@helloworlde.com. Please do follow me on Twitter. I post ideas and concepts all the time. You can also sign up to my website at katiepatrick.com. I've got a bunch of free downloads there. Podcast to go deeper into this stuff, and do get a copy of the book, How to Save the World, on my website and on Amazon if you want to take a deeper dive into these theories, and sort of go deep into gamification and behavior design of saving the earth. And that's it. That's the end. I can answer questions, or we can chat, whatever now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. That was great. I've heard you like talk about these concepts a couple of times before, because we've been lucky enough to hang out a few times, but like it's still really cool to hear it. So it looks like there are a few questions and comments and stuff in the chat. So we can start from the top, and you know, if you asked a question or made a comment, you can just unmute yourself and speak and provide context. So the first one, Austin, was just helpful, so I'm going to skip past that, but thank you. So Sarah, you had a couple of comments. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, no problem. So you showed a few different visualizations with billboards or with VR, for example, where you had real-time like CO2 emissions coming from a building or from a city. And I was just wondering a little bit more about the data and the calculations you used to determine that, and whether it was, you know, actually the real-time generation mix of that utility mixed with the building's like energy consumption, or if you had the real-time energy consumption, but we're using like the average of the utility's energy mix, because I know those are dispatched like essentially real-time in most places.
Yeah, well, I mean, the concept design is just like an overall design that could be applied anywhere. So it would need to vary depending on the utility and their type of data. But the one that I've particularly been working on is in California. So we have like the California ISO, and it gathers like all of the generation data and works out a CO2 for each different kind, and it kind of puts it all together. But that one is, it is for like statewide.
Yep, and
So-
CAISO is ahead of the curve compared to most ISOs in the US.
Yeah, and I haven't actually looked up any other ones because California is a big place and it takes ages to get any idea up and running. But then there's another API called What Time, which also works out, you know about them. You sound like you already know all the answers anyway. That I can. So the What Time also works out the marginal emissions. There's that's probably, from what I can tell, is probably the gold standard. And then what I've actually been working on my own just mission to try and pull together a group of expert people, like a consortium, to try and get the data per geographic boundary, like just per city, so like San Luis Obispo can just get basically like the Cal ISO version just for a smaller area. But it seems like a big thing. Like it's going to be hard to do. Like it's not like you can just be like, call up and be like, hi, could we just like have the, have the data feed per city. So that'll be a big deal. I don't think that happens anywhere in the world if we're able to do that. And yeah, I don't know about the other places because I have not worked on them yet.
Well, I'm excited to see where that goes, because it's definitely a big challenge, and there's not a lot of specific data out there. So.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I mean, I do work on it sort of semi full-time, it's like my current sort of main job right now is to try and get these screens up and try and get the different players in the electricity market to try and fund it. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to make it happen.
And then I had a second question, which was, you were talking about the visualization of the rooftops with rooftop solar. And mentioned the goal of having 100% of households have rooftop solar. And increasing the amount of solar we have in general is is a great goal. But unless we switch to like microgrids, if we are continuing in the current system, especially in places like San Francisco and other places in California, increasing the percentage of rooftop solar ends up leading to higher costs on like lower income households that can't afford to do that. And I was wondering if you could speak to how we make sure that our incentives are aligned properly with things like that.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm probably too much of in the early phases of this to have really gotten into that. Like for that particular project, I had one client who was developing a software startup to try and help people actually pay people for solar. Like they were actually going to like rent the roof and then own it. So there was actually not going to be like a price, for them. And there are a lot of finance options now that don't necessarily make solar more expensive. I know there are in California anyway. So I'm not sure if with solar, especially with that example, saying that, solar, this would create a high, like a higher cost for low income households. If that necessarily happens for that example, and my role in that was kind of like not looking at that. Like my job was to be like, okay, how do we inspire people, who probably, it's not going to cost them any money at all. How do we just get them to agree? Like, so that wasn't kind of part of it. But it has come up a lot though in the work I've been doing on urban heat islands, which is trying to get people to plant trees, right? Because then it's much starker in that, and it's very real that low income areas are hotter and have not as many trees, and higher income areas are cooler and have more trees. And so I'm saying it's not my area of expertise, and it is its own like complex dynamic of how to look at different like social subsidies and how you get around it. So basically I don't have a good answer for this, for what the best way to do it is, because I think you kind of probably like have to have a PhD in how to really understand the dynamics between environmental justice and how to how you kind of like plan these programs to help low income communities and make sure that you're having like environmental change happen, but it's also not affecting anyone. And I think I'm too sort of early in this process. Like there's so much to be done on just trying to get, like, let's say we're just looking at the middle income and wealthy people, like just to get them to do something, you know, like there's so much work to be done. Then to get to the point of like, well, how do we sort of get to everyone and get all these sort of social equity nuances right? But I expect that in a few years, if I get to make more progress, then I will be able to have really gotten into those issues to have like a really good answer. So sorry if that was not answered enough.
Start.
Awesome, thank you. And then Matt, you had a question about Mapbox. I'm not sure what part of the presentation it was, so would you like to unmute and just talk a little more about that?
Hey, yeah, sure. And thanks so much for walking through all this. This was super interesting. It was more actually that part we were just discussing with the solar overlays in the residences. I was just confirming whether or not that was all through Mapbox and the API you were referencing.
Well, I just kind of did that by hand. There was nothing automated. I basically got Mapbox. I took a screen grab of the picture, and then I looked at Google of the area that I wanted to look at. And then I looked at Google Satellite View and just found the solar panels, and then by hand just sort of put them on in Adobe XD. But now so that's just for the design part that I do. But I think when you get into, you have to actually design it up programmatically. You are able to put pins. Well, I hope you can, otherwise my design's not going to work. You can actually put like an overlay of images or polygons or pins or image overlays over the top of the Mapbox base. So you'll be able to have those like images and buttons and sort of things. I mean, Mapbox is pretty flexible. You can do a lot with it. And then you design in your like your sort of website wrapping anything programmatic. Like if that's like a button that can change color or can switch on and off, or you can click on it and it pops open. You can put in that in like the JavaScript sort of website that you have the Mapbox iframe kind of inside.
Got you. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions, comments, anything from anyone?
I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
Yes. So the part when you're talking about social norms and how you could, like you gave the example with the hotel and the panels, and the sign they put up said that there was like 75% of people already do this program and you should too. Did they just make that number up, or because I'd imagine the compliance would already have to be pretty high for people to feel like, oh, I better get on the proper path, because like if the strategy only works when like 80 to 75% of the people are already following the rules, like how does that work?
That's true. I mean, that's a really interesting insight. So the way, well, from what I understand by talking to experts in this, I won't say that I don't think these things necessarily work all the time for everything. You know, you've just got studies that worked in that one scenario. So from what I understand is that, yeah, you're right, when you have to show the majority for a social norm statement to work. You want to say, if you're not going to say like 70 or 80 or 90% of people are doing it, then it's going to backfire. Like you see it done a lot of times. Like once you know this, you'll see it everywhere. You look at some environmental communication, it would be like only 2% of people, you know, like don't litter, and it's like, you know. So if you tell people that, like, you know, only 1% of people are vegetarian, like that's a terrible way to encourage people to go vegetarian. They'll be like, oh, well, hardly anybody does it, so I don't want to do it. I think with that example, they did actually lie and make it up, from what I remember, but it's a kind of a bit of a fuzzy memory from reading that study. I think so, but in terms of with that study, they did have they had like 3 comparison ones. They had one that asked you for an environmental reason, and it did work. Like, I think they got like 25% traction or something like that. And then they had another one that was like a lighter weight version that was like, you know, other people do it, so you do it. And then that one got like sort of 31% or something. And then when they added, you know, 75% and the room number, then it shot up again. And then it was like sort of like 45% or something. So they kind of managed to get like a big sort of uptick from adding that extra, just changing the phrasing. But it still worked when they said, you know, please do it for the earth, but not as well as adding that other stuff in. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that they just made up the 75% for the study.
Thank you, Dan.
Awesome, thanks. Any other questions or comments? And it can literally just be like, this was cool.
Yeah, I guess I have a comment. Yeah, this comment first. Yeah, this is cool. Appreciate this, especially the like behavioral based strategies. So I guess the question is, when you're approaching, say, corporations or funding sources, do you have any strategies or any like behavioral based strategies that you use when like seeking funding or trying to convince people to make a change? Or I guess that's kind of your whole presentation, but yeah, do you have a favorite strategy or anything like that?
Well, I mean, I haven't gotten like that much funding. So you mean for like organizations to fund a thing? Because I mean, this talk is all about how to get like individual, I don't know, groups to do stuff. Like say if you want to get, you know, even if it's a corporation or individual person, you want to get them to, I don't know, go on electric cars or something, how to make that happen. You mean like how to get stuff funded? Well, from my experience of doing that, it's really relationship driven. Human beings do things by relationships. We do everything through human bonds. I mean, in the sort of like social norms and social imitations, you know, that I just went through in this presentation, everything comes down to how humans bond with each other. That's what makes us brings us the most happiness, and it also makes us the most sick if it's bad. If you have bad relationships, you become really unwell. Getting funding is about making friends with people and they like you. And I've done a lot of sales before. I had previously a media company before this, and I had to do a lot of selling of advertising to fund that. So I read a whole bunch of books on sales. And most of the reason why people will spend money is because they like the person. So it doesn't really matter that much about the product. They have to like the salesperson, being likable, you know, listening, having empathy, making eye contact, having good energy, feeling that they can trust you, all that stuff. And so I think that's kind of like the main subtext of how this happens. And I mean, the kind of like the dark side of that is that people will tend to go for what they see as familiar. So you get what happens in Silicon Valley, where you've got this like Silicon Valley sort of like white male bro culture, where although one person who doesn't fit into that might really try really hard to do all that relationship building, but they're like, oh, you're not kind of one of us, so maybe we don't want a relationship build with you that much. That can kind of happen for people that maybe like don't sort of look and feel sort of like the in-group or whatever that is. And it doesn't have to be Silicon Valley bros. It could be like the art scene of people who do art philanthropy. They'll have like a subtle social cues just like a sort of a way of being, you know, a certain type of like inness, in crowdness that, you know, people will need to learn how to resonate with. And that can be hard if you're not naturally sort of one of those types. You know, it's kind of like the dark side of relationship building to get money. So that's basically all I know, I think, when it comes down to that.
Awesome, thanks.
Hey, thanks guys. Any further questions, comments? I think we have time for like one more. Okay, well, Katie, thank you again so much. I think this was, you know, one of my favorites in the series, one of the most engaging ones that we've had so far. So thank you also to everyone who tuned in and, you know, asked questions and brought up interesting points of discussion. So if you missed part of this, you know, if you want to watch it again, if you want to share it with your friends, the session was recorded and it will go up on YouTube. So be sure to check it out there. So thanks to everyone again and have a great evening. We'll see you all later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.